The night I turned 27, everything shattered with one question. Rick, my grandfather, the man my mother feared more than God, lifted his glass and asked, Avery, how have you been using your $3.4 million trust? My heart stopped. My parents froze. I didn't even know I had a trust fund. Then came the second blow. The trust was almost empty. $3 million gone. Spent on Teslas, renovations, a Malibu beach house under my name. And as Rick stared at my parents like he already knew every lie they'd buried, a truth hit me harder than the question itself. They hadn't just stolen my money. They'd planned to disappear before I ever found out. Before I go any further, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family, because what happened that night didn't just break my trust. It tore open every secret they'd buried for years. What came after that question at the dinner table would change everything. I didn't grow up in a family that yelled. My parents preferred key-day weapons, long pose, tight smiles, and the kind of silence that made you feel like you'd done something wrong without knowing what. When I was 8, I asked my mom why Grandpa Rick had such a big house. We were at a fancy restaurant, the kind with tablecloths so white they looked sterile. I remember the smell of butter and garlic drifting from the kitchen, the clink of glasses, the low jazz humming in the background. I'd seen the way waiters rushed to my grandfather, the way other diners looked at him like they recognized power. So I asked the question any kid would ask. Is Grandpa rich? Mom's hand slipped under the table and pinched my thigh so hard I swallowed my breath. She smiled at the waiter like nothing happened. Then she leaned toward me, her voice sugar-sweet but razor-sharp. Avery, she whispered. In this family, we don't talk about money. I didn't understand why, but I nodded and looked down at my plate. The salmon tasted like sand after that. I didn't know it back then, but that moment would become the foundation for every lie they told later. Growing up, I learned to disappear in small ways. My cousin Chase would show up with straight C's, and everyone applauded him for trying. I'd bring home straight A's, and Dad would just nod and tell me not to get cocky. At Thanksgiving, Mom piled mashed potatoes onto Chase's plate, ruffled his hair, called him our little star. She never once asked about my classes. I laughed it off, like I always did, because what else could I do? I swallowed it, but it carved deeper than I thought. By high school, I understood the rules. Chase got attention, I got expectations. Mom told me I was the responsible one, the one she never had to worry about. I used to think that was a compliment. It wasn't. It meant I could be ignored. It meant she didn't have to give me anything. When I was 16, I worked a part-time job at a bookstore. I loved the smell of old pages and dusty shelves, the quiet rhythms of customers browsing. I saved every paycheck. One day in summer, I handed Mom $200 money. I'd earned shelving books and running late-night register shifts because she'd said she was behind on a bill. She kissed my forehead, called me such a thoughtful daughter. Weeks later, I found out she used it to buy Chase a pair of limited edition sneakers. He posted them online with the caption, "You brought it, www.org.org.org.org.org. Thanks, Aunt Lauren." I laughed when I saw it. A hollow little sound. I didn't know it then, but that would matter later. College didn't change much. My parents promised they would support me emotionally, which apparently meant phone calls where they asked about my grades but never my life. When graduation came, I walked the stage with $70,000 in student debt and a degree I'd earned through sleepless nights and cheap instant noodles. After the ceremony, Mom handed me a box wrapped in shiny silver paper. I hoped foolishly that maybe this time they'd see me. Inside was a hardback book titled Managing Your Money in Your 20s. Dad clapped me on the back like he'd just given me the keys to a house. I smiled for photos, then cried later that night while washing dishes in my friend's apartment sink, trying not to make noise. The water was warm, but I felt cold all over. I didn't know it back then, but the book wasn't just a gift. It was a message, a warning, a script they expected me to follow for the rest of my life. After graduation, San Francisco became my battlefield. I moved into a peeling-walled apartment in the Mission District with Jordan, whose energy filled the space the way sunlight fills a cracked window. The building always smelled faintly of burnt toast and old carpet. The pipes hissed like they were complaining about being alive. Every night, I sat at my tiny desk, really just an old dining table, someone left by the dumpster, designing logos for clients who paid late or never. My fingers cramped from drawing, my eyes burned from staring at a flickering screen. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the dark window. Messy bun, fading eyeliner, a girl who looked more tired than 20-something should. I didn't know it then, But that reflection was already a warning. Jordan used to joke that our apartment was the place ambition goes to cry. And some nights, it did. The leaky faucet dripped out a steady rhythm into the rust-stained sink. And outside, the streetlight buzzed like a dying mosquito. I'd sit with a cup of cheap instant coffee, bitter, burnt, metallic, and work until my neck ached. I remember whispering to myself, "You're doing the right thing. You're building a life." But some nights, that mantra felt hollow. One evening, Jordan walked in with a letter in her hand, eyebrows raised. "You got something weird," she said, waving it. The envelope was from a financial firm I didn't recognize, addressed to me, but delivered to my parents' house. She'd picked up our old forwarded mail. I stared at the return address, a tiny knot forming in my stomach. Inside was a generic update about an account I'd never heard of. Something with my name on it. The numbers were blurred, redacted, too vague to understand. Jordan tilted her hill. "You know anything about that?" I told her it was probably a mistake. But later that night, the curiosity gnawed at me. I checked my email inbox, my spam folder, every financial statement I had. Nothing. The letter sat on my desk for weeks. I didn't know it then. But that envelope would become the first loose thread I'd eventually pull. When Grandpa Rick visited me once unannounced, I almost died of embarrassment. He'd called earlier saying he was in the area, which made no sense because he never came south of Pacific Heights unless someone forced him. He stepped into my apartment, and I watched his eyes take in everything. The flickering light, the stack of overdue bills on the table, the bowl of noodles I hadn't finished. He didn't judge, that wasn't his style. Instead, he asked gently, "Are you doing okay, Avery?" I smiled, nodded, lied through my teeth. "I'm fine." He believed me. Or maybe he didn't. But he let it go. I didn't know then that my lie would haunt both of us. A few months later, something else happened, small, but sharp. I got a notification about a credit inquiry under my name. Confused, I called the company, and the rep explained that a new credit card had been opened. Authorized user, Daniel Cole. My dad. When I confronted him, he laughed, like it was no big deal. "It's just to build your credit, sweetheart," he said. "We're helping you." But the next week, I saw a charge for a luxury hotel stay. I asked about it. "Mom Schrogel, we'll pay it off eventually. Don't stress." I did stress, but I swallowed it, like I always did. Holiday seasons didn't help. Thanksgiving at my parents' house was a performance. Perfectly roasted turkey, candles that smelled like cinnamon and money, Lauren staging photos for her blow. She gave Chase a new smartwatch for staying focused on his goals. Even though he'd dropped out of 2 courses that year. My gift, a planner with a quote on the cover, "Discipline is destiny." I laughed at the irony, maybe too loudly. Mom shot me a look across the table. Dad carved the turkey silently. I felt something inside me sink. I didn't know it then. But that dinner was a preview of a much bigger imbalance. Another memory, the one that still makes my jaw tense, happened the winter before everything exploded. Jordan and I were freezing because our heater had died again. We huddled on the couch under 2 mismatched blankets while I debated whether to call my parents. Jordan looked at me like I'd grown another head. "Why do you act like asking for help is a crime?" I didn't have an answer. But the truth was simple. Every time I asked for anything, I felt like I was breaking a rule I'd never agreed to. I didn't know it then. But all those small moments, the pinched thigh at the restaurant, the gift book at graduation, the forwarded letter, the credit card, the hollow promises were puzzle pieces waiting to snap together. And when they finally did, they would form a picture so ugly, I'd wonder how I ever missed it. The week before my birthday began, with the kind of silence you hear right before an earthquake. At work, the office felt too bright, too polished. Like the glass walls were trying to warn me. My boss called me in with that apologetic smile tech people use when they pretend they're your friend. He gestured toward the chair across from him. I sat. He folded his hands. "Avery, I'm sorry. We're downsizing." His voice was soft, but the words hit like a punch. I stared at him, waiting for more, hoping for some alternative remote contract work. Part-time. Anything. But his eyes told me everything. Within 20 minutes, my keycard stopped working, and I was packing my life into a cardboard box that sagged under the weight of old sketches and half-used notebooks. Walking out of the building felt like stepping into a different universe. The air was cold enough to sting my lungs. The city buzzed around me, cars honking. A street musician playing guitar. A couple arguing near the curb, yet I felt numb. When I boarded the bus, the cardboard box slid into my lap. I watched my reflection in the window as the city blurred past. A girl with tired eyes, holding the remnants of a job she'd given everything to. I didn't cry. Not yet. The tears were there, pressing against my ribs. But I swallowed them the way I swallowed everything else. That night, I called my mom. My hands shook as I held the phone. I hated asking for help. But rent was coming, and my savings were barely breathing. She answered on the third ring. Her voice bright and distracted. Hey, honey, can we make this quick? I'm in the middle of something. I told her I'd lost my job. She clicked her tongue. Oh, that's too bad. But you'll figure it out. Maybe this will finally teach you to budget better. Her keyboard clacked in the background. Emails. Messages. Anything more important than me. I said I was behind on rent. She sighed. Avery, we talked about this. You need to make better choices. Anyway, your dad and I made reservations for your birthday. Don't be late. Then she hung up. The call didn't last 2 minutes. I stared at my phone. The screen still glowing. My stomach twisting. I didn't know it then. But her reaction, so cold, so quick, wasn't just indifference. It was fear disguised as detachment. Fear that I might ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. Jordan found me curled on the couch, still holding my phone. She took one look at my face and groaned. Let me guess, Queen Lauren gave you a budgeting lecture. I nodded. Jordan dropped beside me. Hair messy, hoodie stained with coffee from her freelance marathon. Why do you keep expecting bare minimum from people who can't even manage that? I didn't have an answer. Maybe part of me still believed that if I tried hard enough, they might finally see me. Jordan nudged my shoulder. You're better than this. Ave. Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were sharp. I didn't know it then. But that conversation would echo later. Louder than I expected. 2 days later, Jordan came home from checking our mailbox downstairs with a weird look. She tossed an envelope onto the table. This was delivered to your parents' address. Forwarded here. Why are they still getting your financial mail? My heart sank. The envelope had the same return address as the strange letter from months ago. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the broken heater. I opened it slowly. Inside was another vague notice about an account under my name. One tied to a trust I'd never heard of. The language was financial gibberish. But something in my chest tightened. When I told Jordan I had no idea what it was, she narrowed her eyes. You sure? Because this looks important. I brushed it off, shoved the letter into my drawer. Told myself I'd deal with it later. But my hands wouldn't stop trembling. The closer my birthday got, the heavier the air felt. Every night, I lay awake listening to our building's old heater rattle like it was coughing itself apart. Every email notification made my stomach twist, rejection letters piling up faster than I could open them. Rent reminders. Overdue notices. My bank balance shrinking into something that felt like a countdown. Jordan tried to distract me with movies. Late-night pancakes. Stupid memes, but even she could feel the tension tightening around me like a noose. 3 nights before the dinner, I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow. Purposeful. For a second, I froze, thinking it was the landlord coming to remind me the rent was due. My chest tightened so hard I thought I'd pass out. Then the footsteps kept going. I let out a shaky breath. Jordan peered out from her room. Avery, this can't keep going. Her voice wasn't teasing this time. It was worried. Real. I rubbed my face and whispered, it'll get better after the dinner. Even though I didn't believe it. I didn't know it then. But I was walking straight into a trap they'd spent years building. By the time Saturday rolled in, I felt like I'd been hollowed out. My birthday should have meant something: cake, candles, a moment to breathe, but all it meant was a reservation at an expensive restaurant I couldn't afford to walk past, let alone eat in. I stood in front of my closet that afternoon, staring at the same 3 choices. Faded jeans, a blazer missing a button, and the black dress I'd bought years ago for a job interview I didn't get. I picked the dress. It still fit. Mostly. My hands shook as I pulled a brush through my hair, trying to tame the loose strands that had curled from stress. Jordan watched from the doorway. You don't have to go, she said softly. I gave her a tired smile. You know that's not how my family works. She didn't argue. She knew. The bus ride felt like a punishment. I pressed my forehead against the cold window, watching the city roll past, tourists laughing, kids licking ice cream, couples walking hand in hand. All those small, Simple moments felt impossibly distant from the tightening knot in my chest. When the bus finally hissed to a stop near the restaurant, my palms were already damp. Atelier Crest looked like a glittering glass palace from another world. Inside, everything sparkled. Gold-lined menus, soft violin music, the clink of champagne flutes. My parents were already seated at a table near the windows, silhouettes framed by city lights. Mom stood when she saw me, arms open for a hug that wasn't really a hug, more like a photo pose. Her perfume hit me like a punch, floral and sharp. "Sweetheart, happy birthday," she said, kissing the air beside my cheek. Dad looked up from his phone and smiled politely. "You look tired," he said. I swallowed the urge to answer honestly. "Rough week. I lost my job." He blinked once, twice, as if I'd told him the weather. "Well, that happens. You'll bounce back." Then he launched into a story about a client's lawsuit, barely pausing to breathe. They talked about everything except me: Europe trips, Tesla autopilot updates, renovations to their secondary guest bathroom. Whatever that meant. I sipped water because even the cheapest drink on the menu cost more than my groceries for 3 days. As they rambled on, a question kept scratching the back of my mind. How were they affording all this? Dad had always been careful with money. Mom claimed her blogging and real estate consulting brought in good side cash. But I knew the numbers. None of this added up. Then the restaurant's front door opened, and the entire room shifted. Conversations softened. Servers straightened their posture. Eyes widened. Rick stepped inside like a man carved from stone tall. Silver hair, neatly combed. Wearing a dark coat that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. My mother's smile faltered. Dad stiffened. I felt my breath leave my body. Grandpa Rick never showed up unannounced. Especially not to dinners he wasn't invited to. Mom stood up too fast. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Her voice cracked. Rick ignored her, his eyes finding mine instantly. "Happy birthday, Avery." He pulled me into a hug, warm, solid, grounding. I wouldn't miss it. He sat beside me, ordered whiskey neat, and made casual conversation. Except his eyes were sharp, scanning the table, the plates. The tension wrapped around my parents like barbed wire. I didn't understand it yet, but something in him already knew the truth. A dessert menu arrived. Rick lifted his glass. My parents straightened, expecting a toast, a blessing, some grand speech. Instead, he asked the question that sliced the night open. "Avery," he said, too calm, "how have you been using your $3.4 million trust?" The air shattered. A fork clattered somewhere behind us. Mom's face drained of color. Dad swallowed so hard his Adam's apple bobbed like he was drowning. My pulse slammed in my ears. "What trust fund?" The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Silence rippled through the room, wide and suffocating. Mom let out a laugh that cracked on the edges. "Dad, you must be confused. Avery doesn't taps 3. Lauren." Rick cut in. "Don't." It was the first time I'd ever heard her go completely still. Then Rick told the waiter we needed a private room. Within minutes, we were ushered away from the warm glow of the dining hall, into a smaller space where the air felt colder and the walls felt too close. That was when Amelia appeared, tablet in hand, eyes unreadable, and beside her, Ethan Price, Rick's attorney. "We'll keep this brief from wording," Rick said, his voice steady. "I want clarity." Ethan opened a folder, sliding a stack of papers toward me. "Miss Cole, this is the trust your grandfather established for you. It should currently be valued at approximately $3.4 million. My fingers hovered above the page. "Should be. As of this morning," Ethan continued, "the balance is $200,000. The world tilted. My parents sat frozen, pale and rigid. And in that cold little room, surrounded by secrets finally dragged into the light, I felt something inside me crack open, the beginning of an anger I didn't know I had. I didn't know it then. But this was only the first fracture. The real break was still coming. The meeting at Rick's office took place 3 days after the dinner, but it felt like stepping into a second execution. The building itself was a monument to power glass walls, black steel columns, the faint scent of cedar drifting through the marble lobby. Amelia met me downstairs, her heels clicking like a countdown. "They're already here," she said quietly. My stomach tightened. I wasn't ready to look at them. But there was no turning back. The elevator doors opened onto the top floor, where the city stretched behind floor-to-ceiling windows. glowing pale under the morning fog. Rick sat behind his massive desk. Posture straight. Hands folded. He looked older in that moment, exhausted. Disappointed. But anchored. Across from him sat my parents. Mom's eyes were red, though I suspected most of it was performance. Dad looked 10 years older. Slumped. Defeated. I took a seat beside Rick. My palms cold. The room was so silent, I could hear the antique clock ticking behind me. Dad spoke first. "Avery, we didn't mean for it to go this far." Mom reached for my hand. I pulled back before she touched me. Her fingers froze midair. "We were disparity." Dad continued. "The market crashed.